Hello everyone, and Design 101. My name is Jen and I work on the Alexa team and I'll be your moderator today. Just so you know, this webinar is being recorded and we will share the recording with you afterwards. Now before we get started, I'd like to go over just a few housekeeping items. If you have any technical issues, you can use the chat section in your control panel to talk to our technical support team. We'll also be taking questions throughout the webinar and you can submit yours by typing them into the questions pane on the control panel. Feel free to submit them at any time and we will try to address them throughout the webinar as time allows. When you leave the webinar, you'll be asked to fill out a quick 30-second survey. Your feedback will help us deliver more of the content you find most useful, so thank you in advance for that information. Now, as I mentioned, this webinar is being recorded and it will be posted later on our website. We'll send you all the information via email and we'll also post it on our social channels. If you don't follow us on social, please take a moment to do so. On Twitter and Facebook, you can find us at Alexa Devs, and then on LinkedIn, look for our page, Amazon Alexa Developers. Now, before I introduce our presenters, I'd like to kick us off with a short one-question poll. All right, so the question is, have you built an Alexa skill before? You can answer yes, no, no, but I intend to, or what is Alexa? We'll just give you a few moments to answer. All right, now I'd like to go ahead and introduce you to our speakers, Alexa Solutions Architects, Memo and Akers Shrivastava. Memo and Akers, take it away.
Cool. Hi, everybody. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to those of us that are joining us in the evening. My name is Akers Shrivastava. I'm a Senior Solutions Architect on the Alexa team. What that means is I get to go all around the world helping people build amazing things and pioneer with voice design on Alexa.
Yeah, and my name is Memo. I'm also a Solutions Architect at Amazon, and both Akers and I work specifically on the voice design education team. So our focus is teaching people how to build voice first interactive pieces of software using the Alexa platform and all the tools that we have.
And we have a lot of fun doing it.
Yeah. So today what we're going to do is we're going to talk about Voice Design 101. So this is really focused on the design piece rather than the actual mechanics or the specifically talking about one programming language. But without further ado, let's just go ahead and get started.
So about once every 10 years, we see this inflection in the way that people interact with machines, right? And this goes back to the first computers that were ever built, right? The way that we interacted with them was through characters. We would type away or make punch cards. Over time, that evolved vastly into touch interfaces.
There is no way you use punch cards.
I didn't use punch cards, but I've heard about them.
Yeah, well, Akers and I are old, but not that
According
old.
to some people on the team, but it's debatable how long I spend in the crypt.
But the point here is there's been multiple ways of interact with a computer, right?
Exactly.
And where we believe, and Amazon believes, that we're at the dawn of this voice era, and we're there. It's not in the future anymore. It's not something that's coming. It's going to be really cool. It's already super cool. So I think that's very, very exciting, right?
It is. And each one of these kind of inventions, these new interaction paradigms, kind of brought about a very magical moment, right? A lot of people remember the first time that they were able to pinch and squeeze, or pinch and pull to zoom, and use their fingers to manipulate a screen. That same sort of magic has been brought about with voice, which is why we believe here at Amazon that the next major evolution and the next major disruption in the way that humans will interact with machines is voice computing, voice design. So the thing about the power of voice is that it's just the most natural form of interaction. Do you remember, or do your parents ever tell you about the story of the first words that you said?
I don't think so. Maybe, I don't know. I grew up in Mexico, and I vaguely remember that I said the word for car before I said the word for like dad. I don't know if that was my first word, but my parents were. My mom was very amused by that because it offended my dad to no degree that I could identify a car but not say dad.
Well, cars are important.
Yeah, apparently I liked them as a kid.
Yeah. But see, that's exactly the kind of moments that are created with voice, right? Voice is an extremely human interaction. It's a very natural, and it's something that people form a lot of story and memory around. Because it's everywhere, and because we as people are wired for speech, it makes sense that the next evolution in the way that we're going to start interacting with our computing environment is also going to be through speech. So,
yeah, and I think, like going back to the previous slide where we had this kind of ladder of how voice or the different UIs have been progressing, it's about disruption, but it's not about replacement, right? It's not, it's additive. So this morning I was playing around with some Node.js code, and I was installing new packages and stuff like that. And I was using CLIs, and I was doing everything from the keyboard. I wasn't even touching my mouse. It was right on a command prompt or a terminal. So it's not like those went away. And that was like, I mean, punch cards went away because that just don't make sense anymore. But everything else is kind of stuck around, right? Like there's a lot of stuff you're still doing with your mouse and keyboard, even for like gaming applications and all that. But there's also just stuff that just makes a lot more sense to touch. And where voice makes a ton of sense, it's where it's removing friction.
Yeah.
So where you take something that's complicated and you add voice, and so then it becomes very easy, right?
It becomes very natural. Yeah. And that's exactly what we believe here, right? Is the fact that there is something that's extremely accessible about voice, right? No matter where you are in the world, no matter how old you are, how young you are, no matter what the environment you've been brought in, the ability to manipulate, to be able to communicate with your voice is something that's everywhere and that everyone possesses, right? So this we believe. I mean, yesterday we were just talking about, I can't believe we have to type out everything that we want to type, right? Like, you know, we use a keyboard, and some of the something about the keyboard seems so archaic. It hasn't been changed in so many decades. And that's what we believe is we're kind of sitting on the brink of this major change, where now we can use something so accessible, so naturally occurrent to interact with our environment.
Yeah, and it brings technology closer to maybe people that didn't have the privilege of growing up around a bunch of computers or all that. So you have, like, if you try to teach your grandparents or people from a certain generation or that just didn't grow up with computers how to use Lyft or any of the ride-sharing apps, you're probably going to have a hard time. But if you just teach them how to say, Alexa, can you get me a ride? That's a very natural conversation. It would be like my grandma asking me, like, oh, can you get me a taxi? It's very, very similar, almost a one-to-one match. So they'll A, learn it, and B, they'll remember it. And obviously, we're super excited about this. At Amazon, we've created this whole family of devices. We're showcasing this guy over here for the first time. It's the Spot. But we have a whole family of devices. We just wanted to mention that briefly. And as a developer, what's exciting about this, it's a horizontal service, right? So we're not, it's not tied down to just our devices or just a particular device, or when we do improvements to it, oh, your device is too old. It's all cloud-based, so it's very easy, and there's multiple form factors. On the screen you have like Fire TV and the new Echoes, and now multimodal devices that have displays on them. So it really the sky's the limit on that, right?
Yep.
We also wanted to quickly show you a slide of the Spot, even though we have one over here on the screen.
It's really cool.
It's a really nice device, I think, for like having it in the bedroom as like you're on your nightstand. That's like where mine's going. I mean, as soon as I get one. Unfortunately, we don't get to take this one home. We have to wait till our pre-orders ship. And then there's also all these third-party devices as well, and those have multiple different form factors. The three we have on here, one is a phone, the other one's a thermostat, so it actually replaces your thermostat.
Literally.
But it's also voice-enabled, right? And the third one is made by Anchor, and it's very similar to an Echo Dot. But again, it's another example of how we want to promote these devices, have them out there, and you can just get them on Amazon.com, and we don't see a problem with someone else making hardware that has these same capabilities.
And as a result, we have over 25,000 skills in our marketplace. Skills ranging from gaming applications like Jeopardy that provide entertaining experiences for everyone, to skills that allow us to call in, bring in products or services like Domino's for pizza delivery. We also have a wide variety of highly useful skills too, like ones that will bring the news directly to everyone in the morning, or bring about updates on your bank balances.
But in general, like the stuff that we're highlighting here is people that spend some time designing for this, right?
Absolutely.
So that's our main focus today. We want to think about what it takes to design a voice first or voice only experience. You might have a screen, but if you've used an Echo Show or if you use a Spot, you can do everything just with voice. Like if you're across a room, you can still have a voice only experience, even though you have the screen. We're not forcing, or the device doesn't force the customer to go and tap, but it does have new design implications. What do you want to show on the screen, and so on and so forth. But all of these 25,000 skills will work on any device.
Yep.
Right? It's not limited to one or the other. But it's important to just think of what you're saying and what you're asking your users to say, and we'll get into details about that in a second.
So what's new? Well, as some of you that have been familiar in this space, we move very, very quickly here at Amazon Alexa, and we are constantly launching new things, constantly improving stuff. Recently, we brought about Alexa for Business, which allows you now to develop, or allows developers and designers to create enterprise skills, right? Skills for organizations, not just for businesses, to be able to have custom experiences. So private skills are now a capability. The ability to provision and manage hundreds of devices now are also now bottled in with Alexa for Business. You can,
despite it being called Alexa for Business, there's like all different types of applications, right? Like a business could be just a hotel that is voice enabling the rooms, or like
retirement home.
Yeah, retirement home's a good one. I had a conversation at reInvent with someone that was asking me for a product that did a bunch of things, and I was like, oh, Alexa for Business is all of that. But I had to convince him to think about Alexa for Business, because he's like, no, it's a retirement home, it's not a business. So it's just basically allowing to manage and deploy skills on devices at scale.
Yeah.
And scale could be 10, but it's still, you don't have to do each one manually. You don't have to lock it down or like be sharing accounts. So it's really, really powerful and compelling. My favorite, I gotta be honest, is the second one, which is monetization.
Yeah.
So we're providing new ways for developers to earn money when building skills. So integration with Amazon Pay, selling subscriptions, selling one-time purchase items. There's a few games that are coming out that have this. Jeopardy already is out there as a first skill that enabled this, and right now it's in private or developer preview. But as we move forward and in the coming year, our aim is to make this widely available, and we're super excited about it.
And the global expansion, we're going everywhere with this stuff.
Yeah, so today, or a couple of weeks ago, we announced that the devices will be available in 80+ countries, which means that we still have the language models that have been announced before, English and German and Japanese, and then multiple flavors of English, English for India, English for the UK. But now, even if you live in Mexico, like my mom, and my mom is an English speaker, she can order a device from Amazon.com.mx and get a English device or set it up to US English and use it there and have it build like her device there. So this is super, super compelling for customers. And as developers, what this means to you is you just gotta make sure that your skills are available in all those countries as well.
In every place that they can be available. Yep. So let's now kind of talk about a little bit about Alexa Works. Now this we're going to go over very fast. There's a lot of science that we actually simplify for developers. And it begins with this. Now this is the high level of what's happening, right? And the Alexa Skills Kit what we do is we provide a set of tools and self-service APIs that abstract the complexity of things like speech recognition, or machine learning, or natural language understanding, and make it as easy for a developer to interact with and to manipulate as a JSON object, which is what happens in that request and the response. So if a customer were to say the word Alexa or trigger the wake word, what we have is the wake engine now streaming all of the audio that the user is saying over to the cloud. And this is where we do the complexity of all of our speech signs.
Yeah, and I think it's an important distinction because it's a recurring question that I get is, oh, I want something to happen on the device. And understanding that none of your code, none of the skills are actually running on the device, they're all running in the cloud. The only thing that's happening on the device is wake word detection and beamforming. So like that's fancy speech for this device knows how to listen very well. It's got nice microphones and it only turns on and only starts streaming when you say that wake word. And that wake word typically is going to be Alexa. That's the default. Most people have it set to that. But what if you have a kid named Alexa in the house or something like that? You might want to change that out. And there's 3 other options: computer, Echo, and Amazon. That's the only thing that's actually happening on device. And then it's streaming high-quality audio to the cloud.
That's right. And so what happens now? We've got so a customer were to say the word Alexa, the wake word has now been detected and starts streaming the audio over to the cloud. Now this is where we start taking the utterance that the user made and start trying to resolve an intent out of it. This is actually a very, very complicated thing to do. We have scores of speech scientists working on this problem, right? Mapping and trying to derive the intention of something that is spoken verbally, right? Because there's hundreds of ways that you can express the same intent. And to give you an idea of how challenging that can be computationally, we have an example actually of automatic speech recognition. So if I were to say the term 4 miles,
yep,
right? What does 4 miles actually mean? Maybe I'm talking about distance, right? I'm trying to navigate somewhere.
Yeah, find me a coffee shop in 4 miles.
4 miles, yeah. Or perhaps I am talking about music, right? I want, or a tribute to Miles Davis. So 4 miles is actually a preposition. Yeah.
Alexa, ask Spotify to play something like 4 miles, right?
Yeah, yeah.
So.
And then, or maybe we're in a totally different use case and we're in a world building game, right? And we're instructing Alexa to 4 miles, right? Then finally, if you're Memo, not all of us have the luxury of private islands, right?
That's true.
But Memo is shopping for furniture for his private islands. He would be saying 4 miles, right? But all 4 of those things could sound the same. And the point that we're trying to drive here is that the speech science that goes into this is really what Alexa allows us to simplify. So as developers and designers, we can focus on creating a voice service for our customers that actually accomplishes a certain task.
So we're providing all these different tools that allow you to not have to get to this level of detail and say, oh, if it sounds like this, but this is the context, and basically we don't want you to necessarily become a speech scientist or a linguist. If you look at the top of these slides, you'll see some weird characters there, like an upside down omega sign, and all those are just a phonetic spelling. And it's a phonetic spelling of those 4 sentences, really. And that's where ASR, automatic speech recognition, plus natural language understanding kind of married together allow us to do these separations.
And it's a good marriage.
Yeah.
At this point, though, we've now done all of that complexity. This is where the onus now falls on us as developers and designers, is to take that intent, map it to something else, come up with a response that we can then feed back to the user. So this is actually where we also do text to speech and speech to text. So the way that we get all that audio is in a text format, so we can manipulate it programmatically, and then we respond all in text through SSML, which is our speech synthesis markup language, very similar to HTML. And that comes back to the customer in a way, and Alexa is able to then convert it back to voice.
Yeah, and the key here, or like the key message here is, we're not asking you to work with audio and process that audio and then like get speech out of there and then like work with that, or we're not giving you a bunch of text and then just like do whatever you want. We are using training data that you provide to map text to a precise JSON object, and that all you have to do as a developer is just know how to manipulate that JSON object, and you can get a back and forth. But what we're going to be talking about in a second is what are the design implications of that, right? Like, what is my training data kind of have to look like, or how do I map what users are saying? And it's more about the process rather than the actual mechanics of doing it that we're going to be talking today. Like, we just want you to plant some seeds in your head about how you should be thinking about this.
Yep. So now going into some key principles. Now, designing for voice is not at all the same as designing for the eye, and we'll talk about some of the differences, right? But they're very subtle, and although subtle, extremely, extremely potent.
But how often do you, like when you're coding something, how often would you look at a button or some text on a slide even and say, oh, that text just doesn't look right, and you fool around with it, or with the weight of the font or the kerning, I don't know, like how in detail you get. But very rarely would you read it out loud. Does it sound okay?
Exactly.
Because we're used to this graphical user interfaces, and something that might look okay on a screen doesn't necessarily sound right, or isn't necessarily easy to say.
Right. It may look perfect when we're reading it, but when you say it out loud, right, it could have a totally different, I guess, experience.
Or it just might be hard to say.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Maybe difficult to remember.
Yeah.
Right?
Exactly.
And some of these are the principles that we'll touch up on. Now, here's the thing: is because this is so new, and when we came up with this, we didn't really know how this entire world, how this entire skills marketplace was going to be evolving, right? So this is something that we are constantly coming back to here and discussing what works, what doesn't, what are we seeing, and we're always improving the way, or improving at least our learning and the way we go about thinking. Now, that brings up design thinking. So when we're approaching voice, and a lot of us as developers that are on here today always like to think about how we can achieve something programmatically. But we think this is far more fundamental to take a step back and start thinking about it from a voice. Start thinking about it from the perspective of someone that's going to be communicating purely by their voice. And that leads to a few concepts, right? One, we want to be voice first, right? The voice is going to be your primary interface. You may have the Fire TV, you may have a screen like the Echo Show, or the Spot right here's got a screen on it, but you never want to use a screen as a crutch, just as an auxiliary device.
Correct. So like a lot of the power of voice is like I don't have to touch anything.
Mm-hmm.
You can have your hands dirty or whatever, and you can still have a nice interaction. And if then suddenly the developer or the device is forcing you to touch the screen, it kind of breaks that experience. If it's there and it's handy, and like my show is in my kitchen and I'm not doing the dishes, I can touch in it. That's great, perfect experience. But if I'm across a room, I also want to be able to do that same thing without really having to be pulled into or have to walk across a room, right? I think the second concept is really interesting to me, which is cognitive load, right?
Absolutely.
So being able, when you have a screen like we have right now, I can look at the screen and say like, oh, I know what's coming. I can kind of skim it. But when I have voice, once something has left my mouth, once I've said something, that's kind of gone, right? So if you're not paying attention to it and you ask me to repeat it, I can say something that resembles it or that conveys or tries to convey the same message, but I very rarely will say things in the exact same words, exact same order, because it's more about the concept, it's more about the idea.
And Memo brought up a great point, right? And this is actually one of the most interesting things I have to agree with Memo to think about is, and the concept's been around a lot in different circles, right? And this concept is called object permanence scientifically. Object permanence is all about the fact that we have a permanent reminder of how an object is situated and the information that it contains, right? We've been so used to dashboards. So every day you're driving, you don't have to remember the speed that you're driving at because you can just glance down really quickly without taking your attention off the road and keep on driving, right? If you need to know the time, you don't have to remember it. We don't have to come up with a mental mechanism of remembering the time. We can just look at our watch.
I think time is like a really interesting concept. So we have a colleague that's in Ohio, and him and I were at an event in Chicago.
Hey, Jeff.
And yeah, what's up, Jeff? And he was presenting, and he's like, okay, so we're gonna break for lunch, and like in 15 minutes. And I was sitting in the crowd, and I was like, what is he talking about? He's got an hour to go.
Yeah.
And I'm stressing out because if he gets off stage early, it means I'm gonna have to do an extra hour of content. And I love talking about myself, so I could do it, but the crowd probably doesn't want to hear that. So I had to like run up stage and like lean against the podium and say like, "Hey man, you're in Ohio time," because he was looking at his watch, and his watch doesn't have the city on it. He just had like an analog watch that day. If you ask Alexa for the time, it'll explicitly confirm, right, and say like in Seattle, or for the weather, like. I was fiddling around with one of the devices the other day, and it said the weather in Salt Lake City, and like I obviously said the wrong address or the wrong zip code on there, but it's not going to tell you it just 1 degree. What does that mean, right? 1 degree where? And then
what unit?
Yeah, or you might be like layering up, and then you walk out and your device is set to Utah, and you're actually in Seattle. Doesn't mean anything. And it actually might happen in Seattle where like you look out and the day during the winter looks the same, but it might be 30 degrees or it might be 50 degrees, but out of your window it looks exactly the same thing.
And so those are the kind of, that's what we talk about, is when we shape the way that we approach voice design, when we shape the way that we approach development, we want to keep these concepts at the top of our mind because they should effectively drive the way that we approach skill building.
And then thinking about everything as a conversation, right?
Yeah, everything.
So even right now with this webinar, it's a conversation.
Memo and I are talking.
We're having a conversation too, and there's a back and forth. There's body language. There's all these other elements of conversation. But in general, you guys out there watching this are experts at having conversations. You might not be experts at breaking down a conversation, but write it down. Like if it was a script for a movie, and there's a tool for that Amazon Studios has, or you can just do it on a white piece of paper, draw a line down it, and go like Alexa user, get someone to role play with you.
Talk to yourself in the mirror.
Yeah, like does it sound right? And you'd be surprised at how many times you'll catch yourself just by doing that exercise. But if you do it the other way around, if you're like, oh, I've got this API and I need these, like I need an integer here and a date here and a color and hex here, and you pour it back from that, you end up having the user read out, like say out loud a color and hex, and you're like, what? That doesn't make any sense. FF0011, like they should be able to just say, what is that? I don't even know what that is. Yeah, that's
I don't know.
Yeah,
Light maybe.
No.
There's web developers.
Yeah.
That are
So you guys
get us.
You know what I mean. So they should just be able to say blue or red or green or purple, and then like if you actually have a display that's showing it, you say like no, bluer or something, right? Like make it a conversation.
Absolutely. So that brings us into the convergence of design thinking, right? What we want to do is we want to now be very prescriptive about and provide kind of a checklist to go about designing and keeping that thinking at the top of your mind. And the first place that checklist starts is you want to build a skill that's got a clear purpose.
Yeah, like a lot of the time when I'm hacking around, I end up building things that make no sense, right? You famously built something.
Bicycle friend.
Yeah.
Which was actually a push-up counter.
So he built a skill that was called Bicycle Friend, but
skill
then it was a push-up skill, just because like he started with one invocation name and then decided to pivot, but then didn't match his invocation name. So it's just a mess. And that's fine when you're hacking and you're just doing things for yourself. But when you want to get something out there that's got traction, if I go and say, oh, bicycle friend, that might be something I want to use.
That helps you with your bike, right?
Yeah, and then I go like, hey, bicycle friend, and it's like, let's start the push-ups. I'm like, what?
Doesn't work.
Never use it again, right?
Get into trick Memo.
1 star would not skill again. So something that is actually the opposite of bicycle friend is a skill that I like that is called dog feeder. So
Very cool.
what you can do is just say, Alexa, ask the dog if he's hungry. And it'll say, oh, the dog was fed earlier today, or yeah, the dog's hungry. And it's just a little reminder for have you fed your dog, right? Paul's got kids. Paul is our manager, and he uses it to see if they fed the dog. I don't even have kids, but I still use it because time and I don't work well. So if it's like Saturday, I'm like, did I feed them this morning or was that last night?
Memo's feeding his dogs like 5 times a day.
8 times a day. My whole paycheck goes to food. Please send help. So yeah, we can show it off here on the spot. So Alexa, ask the dog if it's been fed.
No, the dog is hungry. Will you feed it now?
So that was a little.
It was a little soft. I don't know if you guys heard
but,
that.
We'll turn it up for a next demo.
Will you feed it now?
Yes.
Okay.
So that is way more natural than saying, computer launch dog reminder, or right, like,
or like clicking a few buttons, or even opening an app and having to check something, right? It's very easy. It's a way. If Memo was counting on me to feed his dogs, which he shouldn't do, by the way, but he would virtually ask me the same way.
Yeah, and the thing that's really powerful about this is like, yeah, an app could make sense for that, but then you have to sign up everyone in your household, and then every time I pull my phone out, I've got some notification there that's like flashy and new, so like, oh, new sneakers are dropping, and then I forget to like log that the dog got fed, and now I'm feeding the dog for the umpteenth time today. So that's a really clear way of like make something that has a clear purpose.
Yep. Now the second concept is really interesting. We talk about a lot of times, especially as skill builders, and for those of us with, or I should say, all of us, anyone that's on here today is exhibiting the spirit of the entrepreneur, right? We're constantly looking to invent, constantly looking to innovate. But part of that dilemma in our head becomes, hey, we want to come up with a name that's really marketable, right? You want to come up with something really unique. I can give you an example of that. Amazon, right? Maybe 50 years ago, if you'd asked someone about Amazon, the first thing to think about is the rainforest. Yeah. But now you ask someone about Amazon, the first place their mind goes to is us, the retailer, right? And if you think...
For someone in the U.S., right? Like if you're in Brazil, we're probably still thinking
yeah. But, if you're thinking about it, right, that name was very unique, and what it did was it afforded a lot of power to be created around that brand, right? So you could create apps around it, you could create a whole environment, a whole technology environment.
But you have to think about like your name in the context of what you're building, right?
Exactly.
So for voice,
you don't have a UI reinforcing it.
Yeah, you don't have a UI reinforcing it. So there was a trend back, I don't know, like 10 years ago where E's were no longer necessary in words. So like Uber was Uber, like UBR, and everyone was dropping the E's from their names.
There was also LY, you remember? Like
that was like Lyft, right?
Apps with like LY.
Or like blah 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 Lee. Yeah, so those like they might sound right or they might look right, but you have to really think in the context of voice. And the thing for skills is like names are not unique. They're not like websites. Where once you have a website name, it's yours. Like if you register it, it's yours, and if someone else wants to take it, they have to buy it off of you. Skill names are not unique. Multiple people can have the same skill name, and what we believe is that the best skills are going to bubble up, and that's what customers are going to keep finding and just gravitating towards. So go out, see what's already built. Does it make sense for you to make another cat facts? Answer, no. I understand the internet is for cats, but there is more about cats than just simple cat facts.
Cat videos, maybe.
Yeah. cat videos.
Just throwing it out there.
Yes.
$1 billion idea right there. But
Billion.
four miles idea. Yeah. But yeah. So kind of bringing it down is like there's a balance that we have to strike. The design integrity of having a skill that's natural to invoke, natural to remember, stays at the top of your head, reduces the cognitive load for your user, and one that's going to still be unique to you and marketable. So striking that balance is very difficult.
Yeah, and we're going to do like an abbreviated demo of this skill that we like. It's a game that's called Yes Sire. So Alexa, play Yes Sire.
Welcome back to Yes Sire. Sire, the king has appointed you to be a lord of these lands.
Alexa, stop. So what we
thank you for playing
sadly
Yes Sire.
Don't have
If you enjoyed this game, check out
time to
Volley
play.
Trivia Showdown.
We have
Right.
a time
A
and
true
just
or
people would
false
do that.
trivia challenge
Probably.
that
Yeah,
puts
you
your
probably didn't
best
join
players
this
from around the world.
stream to see
Find
us
Volley
just
Trivia
play a game.
Showdown on the Alexa store and click enable.
So what we like about this skill is they have this whole theme going where it's like medieval. So you have like a sire and even the logo, which like the logo isn't necessarily the most important part because you'll see that once and then probably won't see it again for a while unless you have a device with a screen on it. But the narrator, they hired someone that's got this awesome like British accent, and it's all tied together and it's very easy to remember. So next time I want to play it, I'm like, oh, I want the sire one.
And the thing is, the thing that's really cool about this is that the game itself reinforces the invocation name. So if you haven't had a chance to play it, I recommend that you do. But just in a nutshell, the way it works is you get a series of challenges and you say yes or no, whether you want to approve it or not. And because it's all medieval, the guy's voice is medieval, the themes are medieval, yes, sire becomes reinforced in the customer, drawing them back again and again and again.
You keep saying that, right? Like and then once you've played through a round, it's like super obvious. Like it's just yes, sire. That's what I'm playing. So that's a good example of making it very discoverable. It's got a unique, interesting name. Like what does that mean? But once you've played it, you're like, oh,
it's
and
unique.
You're not gonna forget it.
Yep.
There's nothing more frustrating than so like if you want to make something that's really unengaging, there's two quick paths to it. One, you make the name really hard to say.
Oh yeah. Make it X's and Z's and Y's, you know.
Exactly. So, and then the second one is break your back end.
Yeah.
So I find something I like, and then I say, oh, Alexa, trigger that skill, and it just goes boom, errors out because the user, like the developer, was running it off a desktop under his desk and his wife unplugged it or whatever. That's immediate for me, 1 star, because I used to like it, I was a fan, and then it went away, so I'm now angry.
Yeah, that commitment to customers, which actually is a great segue into our next point, which is we want to design for natural language conversation. Make the skill, make your experience comfortable for someone to use. That means start working with the people that you think are going to be using your skill and think about what's going to be comfortable for them in order to verbally invoke, verbally to interact with. We have to account for really broad interactions, right? So if you're creating, if you're creating a skill that, I don't know, tells you where to find a plot of land to farm soybeans. All right. Well, you're going to have to think about the types of people that want to farm soybeans and the types of interactions that they're going to have for farming those soybeans.
I don't think the soybeans skill is $1 billion idea.
Soybeans are delicious, though.
Yes. Like Hirsch. Yes. But I think, like in a nutshell, what you want to do as a developer, as a designer, as a skill builder, is your aim is to have a design that mimics a conversation between two humans. Mm-hmm. Because you happen to be talking to an AI, you shouldn't bring it down, because then if you're aiming here, you're going to kind of end up down here, and it's going to be a weird, janky conversation. If you aim up here, you probably will end up higher than you expected, and it's going to be way more natural and adding all these little details. And what we were saying about writing it down as a dialogue adds a ton. And I'll give you a quick example. If I ask a Kirsch a question like, where are you going for Christmas?
I'm going to be spending the holidays with my family in Southern California.
And I wouldn't immediately just ask you another question if this was a real conversation. I would say like, oh, that's super cool. Like, man, the weather here sucks. I bet it's going to be nice and sunny down there. So I have a little tidbit there to break up. I know I'm going to ask him another question, like, when are you leaving? And like, didn't we have a meeting that day?
Yeah.
But I'm going to break those up. It's not going to be an interrogation. It's not going to be like, where are you going? When are you going? What flight? What time? Blah, blah, blah. Like, I'm going to try and break it out because it's a conversation. I'm not trying to sound angry. I'm going to like be friendly and just have a conversation.
And that's the other thing is that Memo right there just exhibited the nature of that skill, right? That nature of that skill, or if Memo was, the nature of that conversation, Memo was trying to find out what my plans were. I gave him a little more information than he needed. Told him I was going to be spending it with my family. Now that is what we mean by being able to handle broad interactions, right? People may give you more information than you're asking for. So you have to be able to capacitate for it.
Yeah, and it won't necessarily be in the format that you want or in the order that you want. It's not like filling out a web form where you have everything listed out in a row, right? Like, that's why I like this skill. Like, I really like the TED Talk skill because they have an app or multiple apps and they have a website and whatever. And those other graphical interactions, they tend to their design principle or their North Star. And I haven't talked to this company at all, but just from using it, their North Star when they're doing a graphical user interface is more, I'm going to find you the perfect TED Talk that you want to hear right now.
Yeah.
And you can have a bunch of filters and
playlists and stuff like that.
And like what year did they do it?
But sometimes you just like, I want to hear something funny.
Exactly.
I want to hear something Memo.
And if if you're using a voice UI, you probably don't want to answer 10 minutes of questions. To get to a 5-minute talk.
Yeah.
You just want to talk.
Yeah.
So if you use the TED Talk skill and you just say, Alexa, ask TED Talks or something funny, it's just going to go, bam, here's this TED Talk from this guy or gal or whatever, and go, right? And if you don't like it, you can just say like skip or next or play another one, and it'll just give you another one. Instead of having their North Star for their voice interaction be, I'm going to find you that perfect TED Talk, I'm going to get you content quick.
Yeah. And relevantly, right? And like, here's the cool part about this that I also like is like, and I always think about this is that, TED Talks are for talks, right? So it makes a lot of sense that audio is going to be the #1 sense that you're engaging. And then #2, verbally, it makes a lot of sense because you're kind of like, hey, I want something funny, or I want something serious, or sad, or happy, or I wanted the biggest stuff. And the coolest thing is that like the skill kind of accounts for that.
Yeah, and I think it just showcases how, depending on how you're sharing this content, or using an API or whatever, you have to make design decisions about it.
Yep. Which leads us right into the next topic, which is using good interaction design practices. Now, what does this mean? Well, with the Alexa Skills toolkit and with all the other stuff that we put out there, checking our blog, looking on our GitHub, we've come up with a set of tools that really fundamentally abstract some of those principles of conversation that we've been talking about and make them accessible for developers and designers, right? So things like entity resolution. Now, entity resolution is something we talk about a lot, and we blog about it too. But entity resolution, what it does is it allows us to kind of work with the plurality of ways that people may say the same thing so that it can all resolve into a single entity. That way you can create a funnel for maybe a dozen different ways that someone may describe, I don't know, the time of day.
Yeah.
Right? A dozen different ways that someone may describe the time of day, like 4 in the morning, 4 a.m., 15 minutes after 3:45.
Or like we made fun of Jeff for a second, so let's shout out one of his skills. He's got a skill for baseball that's called games back. And one thing he had to account for was all the different ways people called teams.
Oh, yeah.
So like Chicago Cubs and the Cubbies, or like Oakland Athletics, or the A's, or
What's Jeff's team?
Jeff?
The worst team ever.
No, he's from Ohio, so he roots for the Indians,
Oh yeah,
or as he would say, the Windians. But so yeah, it just gives you, we're giving you tools to do things like synonyms with entity resolution.
Yeah, and dialogue management, right? So we had an earlier example of Memo asking me about my holiday plans. I gave him more information than he needed. Dialogue management, what that allows us to do, and I encourage you guys to look at it in our developer blogs, for those of you that are interested in the development side of this, but it allows us to account for acquiring more information than has been asked, but still completes the intention of the skill.
Yeah, and as a designer, like if you don't think about the code at all, you should still look at these tools, and you could build like a mock
To be intelligent.
voice UI, right? Even if you don't build your own code. So we have a tool in our cookbook that will handle basically any intent that you send to it. So it'll just parrot back what the intent was. But it worked with dialogue management where you can say, okay, I want these slots, which are variables for voice, to be required. So let's say I'm trying to buy a car, and there's probably 4 or 5 parameters I need to fill out before I would make an API call to go get car values, because I don't want to return a list of 3,000 cars, because again, there's no skimmability with voice, right? So I gotta balance out how much information I'm going to share with a user, how I'm going to present it, versus how much data I need to collect from them. So dialogue management really allows you to move all that capturing and changing depending on how much information you got to your front end, to your UI, versus having it on the back end, which would be your code, right? And then you're doing a bunch of error handling, and even if you're not a developer, the most seasoned developer doesn't want to spend their time doing error handling. It sucks.
And I mean, even as a designer, right? Like part of intelligent design is making something that can scale really effectively, right? And these are tools that will help it scale.
Yeah, in general, like Amazon, Kirsch, the Alexa team, what we're trying to do is provide a bunch of different tools, good, high-quality tools, to do voice design without you having to reinvent the wheel.
That's right.
So definitely keeping an eye out on what's out there. A good example of this is PetMatch, right? PetMatch is not actually a live skill. It's a tutorial that we built that showcases entity resolution and dialogue management and all these different things. You can find it on our GitHub page. We're actually going to have another webinar tomorrow if you're interested on advanced skill building, and we're going to break down PetMatch. We're basically going to do a deep dive into PetMatch and why we made certain decisions and how certain things work. So if you want to join us tomorrow, same time, we're going to do same time, same place. We're going to do a whole breakdown of PetMatch and really get into the guts of this. So if that's something that interests you, if not, you can find it on our GitHub repo, and it's got detailed instructions for you to build your whole PetMatch. Yeah. Justin, the guy that wrote 99.9% of the code for PetMatch, is going to be actually joining us tomorrow to do this. So it should be really cool. Another great one.
Yep. And that kind of leads us to the unexpected, right? The area that we're all afraid of, but we shouldn't be, because handling things gracefully, handling unexpected user experiences gratefully should be another key point that we all kind of focus on, right? We want to make sure that if a user were to say something else, Memo brought this up a little bit earlier, instead of airing the skill out, you should be able to kind of grapple with what the user said and give them a response that lets them know that this is not a current capability but could be in the future.
Yeah, so the most basic example that I like, and I like it because I've had this happen to me in Spanish and in English, is when you ask, you're at a barbecue or something and you ask someone like, oh, do you want a Coke or a beer? And they say yes. And you're like, yes, what?
Coke,
like,
beer.
Yeah, half and half, both. No, like if they say yes, I'll just be like none. Like, yeah, that's a stupid answer. But it's not really. Like, I was asking a stupid question, and I then would have to do a bunch of this error handling, right? But if I ask the right question, if I say, hey, what do you want to drink? We've got Coke and beer. No one's going to say yes to what do you have? What do you want to drink? Yes, unless there's a product called yes, which then fantastic, right? But if someone replies to that question with tea or milk, I can just have my intent grab that slot and say, I'm sorry, I don't have milk.
Yep.
We have beer and Coke. And then I suddenly look like a genius because I can handle everything that I want.
Yeah.
A cool skill that does this, and this is second positive thing we say about Jeff, so we got to stop with that.
Yeah, this is the last. Sorry, Jeff.
If you know Jeff, or if you find Jeff at Jeff Blankenburg, go ask him why he shaved his beard. But our team and Jeff spearheaded this was the dev tip skill. So you can go try it out now today. Alexa, ask dev tips for Jeff Blankenburg.
I heard you say Jeff Blankenburg. There's a chance I misunderstood you, but I don't know how to answer your question.
Huh.
What do you want to know about?
Tell me about entity resolution. So what you saw
I want to
there
know more about entity resolution.
was it
This
didn't
enables you to
recognize.
define synonyms for the Alexa service to resolve rather than
Alexa.
having to figure this out in your code. For example, in your Alexa,
Alexa.
skill, rain may be
Just
synonymous
turn it
with
down.
downpour, shower, storm.
She
So
likes to talk over us.
yeah. So what we were using the dev tip skill, and the dev tip skill worked fine, but actually we showcased what we were saying. It heard Jeff Blankenburg, but it probably heard it with a weird spelling, and it didn't actually match what it should. Or Jeff only has himself in there as Jeff in his entity resolution, but it didn't error out. It was just like, oh, I don't know how to help you with that, so I'm going to
Take you back.
take you back. And then I said entity resolution. That worked fine. Never left the skill. It wasn't a bad experience. I didn't get the information because it might have been something that didn't actually relate to it.
And finally, we want to take an analytical approach. So this entire time, the rest of the principles have been very synthetic, right? It's how do you start from scratch and how do you synthesize a skill? And that is where we bring the design thinking approach. These are the principles. This is what we want to use to shape our thought and our philosophy behind skill building. But now we get to this point where we're like, how do we improve this? Now, this is analytical.
Yeah, but it goes back to the design thinking piece where when you think you're done, when you have a version, you actually want people to use it, and then you're back to the drawing board.
Exactly. So what we do now is we observe the people that use your skills, see if they're using it the way that we want and we intend. Because as designers, we may not capture everything, and we want to take that knowledge and feed it right back into the beginning and account for it.
Yeah, and you might say, well, Memo, watching customers, that sounds like a Mad Men kind of deal where we have a room with a one-way mirror and we're like
Lab
taking
coats.
notes behind that. Yeah, lab coats. And I frankly don't have the budget for that as a single kind of developer working out of my basement, which I totally understand. And if you're a big company, definitely go the Mad Men route, lab coats. But if you're just a single developer, like there's a beta testing tool now. You can, even if you've got friends that are far flung across the world, you can add them as beta users to your skill, have them test it, just add a little bit of logging to your skill, and that's how you're observing them, right? The other one is have them send some feedback to you. If they're in the same place you are, like bribe them with beer or pizza or whatever they like. Have them over to your place and just let them, like, if you're going to have a game night or a movie night, have them play with your skill for 10 minutes and just take notes. And I guarantee it's going to be worth your time. You're going to learn something. I learned a ton from like demoing my skills to my mom. And she's a dentist, has zero tech knowledge. She still is surprised every time she says something to Alexa. And she's like, she's so useful, she's so nice. But every time I see her use the skills, I'm like, oh, I didn't account for that. Or she says this different. My mom is super polite, so she says please and thank you to everything. So that informs how I design now. And we all have these biases to how we speak or how what words we use. I grew up in Mexico and then spent most of my time in the U.S. I've spent that on the West Coast. So I'm sure that if a linguist heard me speak and for enough time, she or he would be able to look at my speech pattern and say like, oh, probably this or probably that, maybe from California, blah, blah, And I'm sure Kirsch, you had something like along those lines. And but that means I call a can of soda, right? I would never say pop. It just like pop to me.
But Jeff would.
Yeah.
Jeff.
But if you go to Atlanta, everything is Coke, right?
Yeah. That's true. Even Pepsi.
Yeah. Or don't do that because I think you get run out of
and run out of
people get their torches and run you out of the city because you know Pepsi in that city. The main point is we call things certain things, and we think in our mind that's the only way to call them because in our head we're always right.
Yep.
But your users are not you, so you want to see more people. You're going to expand that data set of how you're what you're actually capturing. And the last thing we wanted to cover is a little bit of how you would
go about an exercise,
something, right?
So the other day I was walking home and I was like, I had to cross a bridge and was just like, Memo, you got to get out from under there. We got to get you a proper home.
So I like how in this presentation I went from owning aisles to living under a bridge. So apparently,
you spend all your money on aisles. Like, how are you gonna have a roof over your head?
Exactly. Bitcoin got me again.
Yeah.
But the point is, like, if we were gonna build a skill to find me a home that was neither aisles nor bridges,
something with a roof, ideally, right?
we would have to crawl before we walk, before we ran. And what we mean by that is you want to have like a clear, concise thing that you're going to do, your objective, but how does that pertain to voice? And Kirsch and I are going to go through like a speed round of this, and we're cheating a little bit because we have a ton of experience, but you can do the exact same type of exercise at home, and it'll just take a little bit more of iterations.
So as a designer, two of the most important tools you're ever going to run across are
super
scratch
high-tech
pad and pen, right? And these are the two things that you need to get.
Very high-tech. Right? So the first thing is, okay, we want to find a residence, right?
Sure.
So
actually, you're right. So that is, I've identified our core functionality, right? So find a residence, right?
And in Alexa speak, this piece is not necessarily, but is going to inform our invocation name. That's at the core of everything.
Yep.
I need a good invocation name that needs to be memorable, easy to find, defines a clear purpose. We won't get to that point right now, but we know that it's find a residence, and we need to work on it, and we need to spend time. If you were building an app or a website, you wouldn't just say like, oh, whatever, I'll think about the logo for 10 seconds. You'd spend a lot of time designing that.
So now what we've got is, since we've got the core functionality, let's think about how people find residence. So Memo, what kind of house do you want?
And I'd say, oh, I want a condo in Belltown.
So he says, okay, condo, which is a type, right? So we got type, and he said location, right? And that's going to be a place, yeah. So you can see that we've already started kind of mapping out the capabilities that surround that core functionality, right? And you can imagine that, maybe Memo wants to look by square footage, right? Or he wants to look by number of bathrooms because, well,
yeah,
he's Memo and he wants me over sometimes.
Never.
So we've got our capabilities around the circle, around our core functionality, and this is what we call walking. Right? Before you run, you have to walk.
But then by the point you want to run is when you start mapping that kind of stuff to like, what is this slot or what is this utterance, and kind of expanding on that. So, we probably want entity resolution on type.
So what we're going to do is, so all of these, right? How many different ways are there to say a house, right? You may say a home or a brick building, a loft, right? So for that, we may want entity resolution. So what we're going to do is we're going to put a horizontal line under this and write entity resolution potentially.
Yeah, or dialogue management, or what is required.
Right.
So like this was a very kind of quick and dirty way, but at the end, if we expanded all that out for each one of these blobs, we'd have a little piece of design that we can then take and start building on a skill on that.
And what's cool is, like, we could start with square footage and expand outwards from there, right? Talk about how we might want to use dialogue management to narrow out more details.
Brooms or
yeah.
whatever, like maybe number of bathrooms becomes an intent that is just number of, and you can have like parking spaces,
Garages,
bedrooms, whatever.
Yeah. Lawns, backyards,
Pools
islands,
for a Kirsch.
pools, lawn chairs.
All right. So we unfortunately are out of time. We've just been notified. So we just wanted to give you a few more resources before we leave. The first one is the design guide. Super cool. Like most of what we talked today is covered there in the design guide, or basically all of it in more depth. So if you just don't want two knuckleheads explaining it to you and you just want to read about it, go to alexa.design guide. We also have a white paper on building a standout skills. So you can go to alexa.design/standouts. We host weekly office hours where one or two people from our team will just be there for an hour and just interact with the community. You can check those out on alexa.design/office hours. And then we have rewards. Every month we have different rewards. It might be socks, it might be skins for your device, it might be an actual device.
T-shirts, hoodies.
All kinds of stuff. So you can check those out at alexa.design/rewards. My beard's not fake. I didn't get it there. But if you want, maybe we'll do fake beards. It is Christmas.
It's Memo.
So we would definitely you want to check those out. We're going to be doing more stuff. Like I said, we're doing a webinar tomorrow again. We'll probably be doing a design thing on Twitch right after that, and we're going to be ramping that up. So without further ado, we just wanted to say goodbye for us, and then we'll let Jen do a little bit of housekeeping. My name's Memo Doring. You can find me on @MemoDoring, basically on any social platform.
Don't follow him. Follow me. My name's Akersh Rivasava, and my Twitter handle is @TheOnlyAkersh.
Because you are the only Akersh.
I am the only one.
There are no more Akershes in the world.
No more. Follow me.
If there's an Akersh on the stream, please go DM Akersh and tell him to change his Twitter handle. All right. Thank you so much. It was an absolute pleasure.
Thanks so much, guys, and thanks to everyone for attending the webinar. So before we close out, just a quick reminder that once you leave, you'll receive a survey on the presentation. Please just take 30 seconds to give us your feedback, and then we'll also send you a follow-up email in the next day or two with a link to the recording, as well as a guide and some other helpful resources to recap the webinar today. So thank you again, and have a great day.